This presentation on double object pronouns goes along with our Así se dice Level 3 Repaso F work. Before we start talking about using double object pronouns, let's do a quick review of what the indirect object pronouns are and how we use them when we learn them with the verb buscar. When we talked about the indirect object pronouns, we talked about using them to replace first, second, and third person indirect objects. We said that the indirect objects replace nouns that are used to tell to or for whom something is done. So when you ask yourself the verb and ask yourself to or for whom is this action done, that's the answer to finding the indirect object. So in the sentence, let's say, Tomás da un libro a su amigo. We have a direct and an indirect object noun in this sentence, but if we concentrate on the indirect for a minute, we would say in our translation, gives what? Book, that was the direct. To whom? To his friend. So that was how we found the indirect object pronoun. And then we corresponded with the fact that le is third person singular, and so is a su amigo. So when we made the choice, we picked according to third person singular pronoun to replace or to use in addition to the a su amigo. When we talked about using direct object pronouns, we worked with these to find replacements for direct objects in sentences. And to find the direct object, we would say the verb to ourselves and ask ourselves the question, what? So say the verb and ask what is being acted upon. The answer to the question is the direct object. So say the verb and ask the what question. As long as there is a direct object, because some sentences, as we know, don't have them. So back to that sentence about Tomás, if we looked at the fact that the book is the thing that is being given by Tomás, then we would choose el libro as the direct object. So far we've already worked with these two pieces independently. And what we're going to do now, so we'd ask ourselves, gives what? Gives the book. Okay? We would look at the direct object pronoun choices, and when you see book is singular and masculine, that's how you make your decision to pick the singular masculine direct object pronoun. That's the one that would replace el libro. And in the case of the direct object, we are getting rid of it and changing it into a pronoun. So that's work we've already done. One more thing to talk about before we try to use the double objects is a quick reminder about what were the placement rules that we had. We know we had 3 different possibilities for the kinds of verbs you might be working with in a sentence. And the first we said, what if I'm working with a simple conjugated verb? It could be present tense, it could be past tense, but if the verb is conjugated, I'm going to place, and this is a placement holder, my direct or my indirect object pronoun in front of that simple conjugated verb. If I was working with a verb that's a little bit more complex, so it has 2 parts to it, then we talked about having a choice. We could either put the pronoun in front of the verb phrase, the pairing, or we could attach to the second verb, which would be an infinitive, or maybe a participle. And the third situation we talked about, what if in your sentence you're working with a command? And in that one, with a positive command, you are commanded to attach the pronoun. So that's an easy way to remember what to do with it. And that's a visual way to remember those placement rules. But again, if you look back in your notes, just a reminder of what those stood for. Number 1 was a simple verb, and number 2 would be something a little more complex. So a compound verb with 2 parts to it. And in the third situation, we were talking about a command. So the shorthand way to remember those rules is what you see above. Looks a little bit more like just a formula. These three example sentences we could use to illustrate what we're talking about. So, Pepino pone el rescate debajo de la silla. If I want to replace the direct object pronoun, let's work with those. I would ask myself, puts what? Because pone is my verb, to place or to put, and the answer to that question would be the direct object. So we know that in this case, it's the ransom. So I would take el rescate out of the sentence and change it to lo. And then I could rewrite the sentence placing lo, in this case, in front of the simple verb. So I would end up with Pepino lo, and then the pone verb, and the rest of my sentence, debajo de la silla. That doesn't change, okay? That's just a prepositional phrase. In the second type of sentence, Pepino quiere capturar al secuestrador. Wants to capture what? The kidnapper. The kidnapper is a singular masculine noun, so I will work with the pronoun lo. I'll replace el secuestrador. And now, because I have a compound verb, I have two ways to write this sentence or to speak it. I could say, Pepino lo quiere capturar. That's option one, putting it in front of the first verb, okay, the helping verb or the first verb of the pair. I'm using two verbs together here to translate the idea, wants to capture. And my new sentence could look like that. Pepino lo quiere capturar. Or I have that second option, Pepino quiere capturarlo. So far this is all what we've been practicing already in class. This is a bit of a review. I could attach the lo to the end. In the third situation, where we have a command, as in ponga, there should be an exclamation point here, el rescate debajo de la silla. Okay. I would look at that verb ponga, place. Place what? Place the rescate, the ransom. Again, it's a singular masculine. I would make it a singular masculine lo, direct object pronoun, and then rewrite it as one word, pongalo. And you have to do that with command forms. And add an accent mark because you've affected the length of the word. And if you remember the rules about figuring out the rules of stress, if we have a word that ends in a vowel, the stress should be on the next to the last syllable. And to keep the pronunciation of ponga accurate, I would have to move that stress over with a written accent mark. Okay, so that's a review of what we've had before, working with the rules of placement. Now these are still going to be so important because when we talk about using double object pronouns, these rules still apply. Let's practice with just a couple of more sentences using both the direct and indirect object pronouns. Suppose I had the sentence about el campo. In el campo, let's say, el granjero he's the granjero, sorry, da comida a los animales. And in this sentence, with the simple verb da, I have both a direct and an indirect object, because if I say to myself, okay, the farmer gives what? Comida. That would be a direct object, and it's singular and it's feminine, so I'll replace it with la when I rewrite my sentence. To whom does he give the food? He gives it to the animals. That would be the indirect object pronoun. That will become a les. So we said indirect before direct, and they both happen to start with L, so I'm going to keep that in mind. I'll get my order straightened out first in my head, and then, because they both start with the letter L, I'm going to change this one to a se. And now when I place them into the new sentence, I would still have en el campo, just the way it was. That's a prepositional phrase telling where. And el granjero, because he's just the subject, or the doer of the action. So he doesn't change. And then when I look at my verb da, I place the se and the la in front of da. And there's my new sentence. I can leave a los animales if I want to, just to make that a little bit more clear. So that piece with the indirect object, you're always allowed to do that. Animales. Okay, as an indirect object. So that part clarifies who this stands for. It almost becomes really important, doesn't it? Because if I looked at the sentence with just a se in it, I wouldn't know what that originally was. So on the next slide, let's try one more. Okay, how about mi papa? Let's go backwards this time. Me lo quiere dar. And try to translate what that would mean. So I have a subject, mi papa. I can see that there's an indirect and a direct object in this sentence. So I know that this stands for to me because that's the only thing it could be. Then I look at the lo and I think, that's an it. Could be anything. Could anything masculine, singular. I'm not really sure what it stands for. I just know that my dad wants to give it to me, would be the way I would have to read that sentence. So you really have to kind of skip those pronouns for a second when you're trying to interpret them and then go back and figure out what they stood for. And back to this, who knows what that was? That would have to be something in your original conversation. Maybe it was money, el dinero, but you can't really tell. Okay, let's look at one more that would have a command, because this, of course, could have been written as mi papá quiere dármelo. That's always the option when you have a verb phrase, that you could attach those two pronouns and end up with, quiere dármelo, and that would be your verb phrase. Okay, one more practice. In a third type of sentence that we've talked about, we might have a command. So we might have, bring me the money, that the ransom, the kidnapper could say. So he could use traiga. That's a command form, bring. And he might be talking about el rescate. And to whom would he bring the ransom? To us. Let's make it. Maybe he has a friend. We'll find out, won't we? Okay, so looking at that sentence, again, looking at the traiga, bring what? Bring it. To whom? To us. I have to put those into the sentence, putting the indirect object in front of the direct, because that's the order that they would have to go in. And now, because this is a command, I really don't have any option here. I'm just going to have to do it as a traiga nos lo. One word, okay? And I would accent on the A of traiganoslo. That was just a messy dot. All right, so I'll attach a practice sheet for you to eChalk, and I hope that you can practice with these before we get to class on Monday. Adios.